trembling voice broke the silence as 12-year-old Ava, clutching a crumpled page, read her story of a bird escaping its cage. In that moment, Sarah Thompson's dream open words became a beacon for Chicago's forgotten. But how did a waitress with bruises on her wrists build this haven against all odds? It began with a billionaire's question in a gritty diner: did someone hurt you? A single spark ignited a journey of courage, betrayal, and redemption. Will you follow Sarah's story? The Starlight Diner sat quietly on a gritty street in Chicago's South Side, its neon sign flickering like a weary pulse. Inside, the air carried the scent of burnt coffee and fried onions, a familiar comfort to the regulars who shuffled in for cheap meals. Sarah Thompson moved swiftly between tables, her apron stained from a long shift, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. At 27, her eyes held the weight of someone older, someone who'd seen too much. Tonight, like most nights, she poured coffee with mechanical precision, her mind elsewhere, on bills, on her brother Noah, on a life she barely remembered dreaming about. James Parker sat in his usual corner booth, his laptop open but untouched. To the world, he was the CEO of Apex Innovations, a tech empire built on ambition and ingenuity. Here, he was just a guy in a hoodie, blending into the cracked vinyl seats. He came to the diner for its anonymity, a refuge from the polished chaos of downtown Chicago. But tonight, his gaze wasn't on his screen. It was on Sarah's wrist as she refilled his coffee, where faint purple bruises peeked from beneath her sleeve. His jaw tightened. "Sarah," he said, his voice low but steady, "did someone hurt you?" The question cut through the hum of the diner. Sarah froze, the coffee pot trembling in her hand. She yanked her sleeve down, covering the marks. "I'm fine," she said, too quickly, her eyes darting away. She stepped back, but James's gaze held her, not accusing, but concerned, piercing in a way that made her feel seen, too seen. "Your coffee's getting cold," she added, turning toward the counter. James leaned forward, his voice softer now. "Those bruises tell a different story." He'd been coming here for weeks, always quiet, always tipping generously. He'd noticed Sarah's guarded smiles, the way she flinched at loud noises, the exhaustion she tried to hide. She wasn't just another waitress to him anymore. Sarah's shoulders stiffened, her pride flaring. "It's nothing you need to worry about, Mr. Parker." Her tone was sharp, a wall thrown up fast. She didn't need pity, especially not from a man whose watch probably cost more than her rent. In this part of Chicago, people like her scraped by while the city's elites soared above, untouchable. The South Side's clinics were underfunded, mental health care for veterans like her brother Noah was a pipe dream, and Sarah had learned long ago that help from strangers always came with strings. "Everything okay over here?" Mia Rodriguez, Sarah's co-worker and closest friend, appeared beside the table, her arms crossed, a dish towel slung over her shoulder. Her dark eyes narrowed at James, protective and wary. "All good, Mia," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "Mr. Parker was just asking about the pie special." Mia didn't buy it, but she nodded and headed back to the kitchen, glancing over her shoulder. James slid a business card across the table. "Apex Innovations," he said. "If you ever need to talk, Sarah, I'm not just some guy." Sarah stared at the card, her fingers twitching. "I'm not your charity case," she whispered, her voice fierce, her eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen before. "Please, just drop it." James raised his hands in surrender, returning to his laptop. He was used to people changing when they learned who he was, a billionaire, a name in headlines. But Sarah's rejection wasn't awe or greed, it was defiance, raw and real. It unsettled him, stirred something he couldn't name. As she walked away, her steps quick but heavy, he knew those bruises weren't just marks on her skin. They were a story she wasn't ready to tell, and for reasons he didn't yet understand, he needed to hear it. Sarah Thompson wiped down the counter at Starlight Diner, her movements automatic but her mind racing. The night James Parker asked about her bruises lingered like a bruise itself, tender and impossible to ignore. She'd pushed him away, but he kept coming back, always in that same corner booth, his laptop a prop he barely touched. Each time he ordered coffee, his eyes searched hers, not with pity, but with something deeper. something that made her want to trust him even as she fought it. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when every dollar from her tips went to keeping the lights on and Noah's medication stocked. Noah. Her brother's name was a weight in her chest. Once a towering figure, a Marine who'd carried her on his shoulders as a kid, he was now a ghost of himself, haunted by memories of war. His PTSD episodes came without warning, his fists sometimes finding her in the dark, before he realized who she was. The bruises on her wrist were his, unintentional but real, each one a reminder of how the system had failed him. Southside Chicago had no safety net for veterans like Noah, no affordable clinics, no counselors who understood the scars war left behind. Sarah worked double shifts, but the bills kept piling up, and the VA's waitlist stretched endlessly. James noticed more than Sarah wanted him to. One evening, as she cleared his table, he spoke softly. "I've seen those marks before, Sarah. They're not nothing." His voice wasn't accusing, but it carried a weight that made her pause. She wanted to snap back, to tell him to mind his own business, but the sincerity in his eyes stopped her. "It's my brother," she blurted, the words escaping before she could pull them back. "He's a veteran. He has episodes. He doesn't mean it." Her voice cracked and she turned away, cursing herself for letting him see her vulnerability. James's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Your brother's name, it's Noah Thompson, isn't it?" Sarah froze, her hand gripping a rag. "How do you know that?" she demanded, her heart pounding. James hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was in a conflict zone, testing tech for the military. A Marine saved my life, took shrapnel meant for me. His name was Noah Thompson." The diner seemed to shrink, the air thick with the weight of his words. Sarah stared, disbelief warring with a strange sense of fate. "You're saying my brother saved you?" she asked, her voice trembling. James nodded, his eyes distant. "I've been looking for him ever since, to thank him, to, I don't know, make it right." Sarah's knees felt weak. She sank into the booth across from him, the rag forgotten. "He came back broken," she said, her voice raw. "The VA promised help, but it's all red tape. I can't afford private care on a waitress's salary." The admission burned, a confession of her powerlessness in a city that favored the wealthy. James's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I can help, Sarah. I have resources, connections to specialists." "No," she said sharply, her pride flaring. "We don't need your charity." The words stung, but she couldn't stop it. James wasn't just a customer anymore. He was a billionaire, a man from a world that didn't care about people like her or Noah. She stood, ready to walk away, but James's voice stopped her. "It's not charity. It's a debt." His words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Mia appeared from the kitchen, her eyes narrowing at James. "You okay, Sarah?" she asked, her tone protective. Sarah nodded, forcing a smile. "Just talking, Mia." But Mia lingered, her gaze wary. "Rich guys don't hang around diners for the coffee," she muttered later, as they closed up. "Be careful, Sarah. Men like him always want something." Sarah didn't respond, but Mia's words echoed her fears. Yet, as she locked the diner's door, she glanced at James's business card, still tucked in her apron. She should throw it away. Instead, she slipped it into her pocket, her fingers brushing the bruises on her wrist. For the first time, she wondered if someone might actually see her. Not just the waitress, not just Noah's sister, but her. And that thought, fragile and dangerous, kept her awake long into the night. Sarah Thompson's life had always been a balancing act, but now it felt like walking a tightrope with no net below. Since her reluctant admission about Noah's PTSD, James Parker had become a fixture at Starlight Diner, his presence both comforting and unsettling. He didn't push, didn't pry, but his quiet persistence, ordering coffee, leaving generous tips, asking careful questions, chipped away at the walls she'd built. Sarah wanted to resent him, to see him as just another rich man throwing money at problems, but his eyes held a sincerity that made her question her defenses. Still, she kept him at arm's length, her pride a shield against a world that rarely gave without taking. One rainy evening, as the diner emptied, James stayed late, his laptop closed for once. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I've found a specialist for Noah. Dr. Emily Chen, one of the best for combat PTSD. She runs a private facility outside Chicago, fully funded for veterans who can't pay." Sarah's hand stilled on the coffee pot, her heart caught between hope and suspicion. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Because I owe Noah my life. And because I see what it's costing you to carry this alone." The words hit harder than she expected, stirring an ache she'd buried long ago. She agreed to let James arrange a consultation, but only if he promised not to interfere further. "This is for Noah, not me," she insisted, her voice sharp with pride. James nodded, respecting her boundary, but the air between them shifted, charged with an unspoken understanding. Over the next few days, they began to talk more, not just about Noah, but about themselves. During a slow shift, Sarah shared a piece of her past, how she'd studied literature in college, dreaming of becoming a writer, until her parents' death in a car accident forced her to drop out to care for Noah. "I used to write stories," she admitted, her eyes distant. "Now I just write grocery lists." James listened, his usual guarded demeanor softening. "I get it," he said. "I built Apex Innovations to help people, not just to make money. But success, it's lonelier than I expected." His confession surprised her, a crack in his polished exterior. For the first time, Sarah saw him not as a billionaire, but as a man searching for meaning in a world that worshipped his wealth. Their conversations grew into stolen moments, brief walks to the bus stop after her shift, shared glances over the counter, that felt dangerously close to trust. But trust came with a price. James invited Sarah to a charity gala downtown, a fundraiser for veterans' mental health. She hesitated, knowing she'd be out of place among Chicago's elite, but agreed for Noah's sake. The event was a stark reminder of the city's divides. In a glittering ballroom, Sarah, in a borrowed dress, felt the weight of curious stares and whispered judgments. Women in diamonds sized her up, their smiles thin. Men in tailored suits spoke over her, assuming she was James's fleeting interest. One guest, a venture capitalist, asked pointedly, "So, what do you do besides serve coffee?" Sarah's cheeks burned, but she forced a smile. "I keep people fed," she said, her voice steady despite the sting. James, noticing her discomfort, stayed close, his hand brushing hers in silent support. Later, alone in her cramped apartment, Sarah found an old notebook tucked in a drawer, its pages filled with stories she'd written in college, tales of hope, loss, and redemption. She traced the faded ink, tears welling as she remembered a younger version of herself, unburdened by grief and responsibility. The dreams felt so distant now, smothered by the reality of double shifts and Noah's struggles. Yet, James's offer to help Noah sparked a flicker of possibility. Could she dare to dream again? The thought terrified her, not because it was impossible, but because it meant letting someone in. Mia, ever the realist, noticed the change in Sarah. "He's getting under your skin," she said one night as they scrubbed the diner's grill. "Just don't forget who you are, Sarah. Guys like him live in a different world." Sarah nodded, but Mia's words echoed her fears. She was a waitress from the South Side, scraping by in a city that favored the wealthy. James's world, with its galas and influence, felt like a place where she could lose herself. Yet as she slipped James's business card from her pocket, her fingers lingering on its edges, she couldn't shake the feeling that he saw her, not just the waitress, but the woman she'd almost forgotten how to be. Sarah Thompson's world felt like it was splitting at the seams. The fragile trust she'd begun to build with James Parker had brought a flicker of hope, but it also exposed her to a reality she wasn't sure she could navigate. Noah's treatment with Dr. Emily Chen was showing promise. His episodes were less frequent, his eyes less haunted, but the cost of that hope was Sarah's growing unease. James's presence in her life, once a quiet comfort, now felt like a spotlight, illuminating the chasm between her South Side struggles and his world of wealth. Every stolen conversation, every lingering glance pulled her closer to him, yet further from the woman she'd fought to remain. The breaking point came unexpectedly. Sarah was wiping down tables at Starlight Diner when Mia slid a tablet across the counter, her face grim. "You need to see this," she said. The screen displayed an email from a local small business grant program Sarah had applied to, hoping to fund her dream of opening Open Words, a community literary space. The email mentioned a generous guarantor who'd bolstered her application, James Parker. Sarah's stomach dropped. He'd gone behind her back, using his influence to push her dream forward without her consent. The betrayal stung, sharp and personal, as if he'd reduced her to a project, not a partner. That night, James arrived at the diner just before closing, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a cautious optimism. "I heard from Dr. Chen," he started, but Sarah cut him off, her voice low and trembling with anger. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" She held up the tablet, the email glaring between them. "You guaranteed my grant application, without asking me. Do you think I'm too poor, too helpless to do this on my own?" James's face fell, but he didn't back down. "I wanted to help, Sarah. Your dream deserves a chance." "It's my dream," she snapped, "not yours. To buy?" The argument spilled into the empty diner, their voices echoing off the linoleum. Sarah's hands shook as she spoke, years of pride and pain pouring out. "You think you can fix everything with money? But I'm not for sale. Neither is Noah." James's eyes darkened, hurt flashing across his face. "This isn't about money. It's about believing in you." But Sarah couldn't hear him through the roar of her own fears. She turned away, her chest tight, feeling like the Southside girl who'd never belong in his world. The next blow came at a corporate dinner James had convinced her to attend, a gathering of Apex Innovations board members at a sleek downtown restaurant. Sarah, in another borrowed dress, felt like an imposter among the clinking glasses and tailored suits. Elizabeth Harper, James's sharp-tongued CFO, greeted her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're quite the inspiration," Elizabeth said, her tone laced with condescension. Later, as Sarah excused herself to the restroom, she overheard Elizabeth's voice in a hushed alcove. "She's using you, James," Elizabeth said. "A waitress with a sick brother. It's a perfect sob story. You're guaranteeing her loan, funding her brother's treatment. What's next? A ring to secure her loyalty?" Sarah's blood ran cold. She stepped into view, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. "I don't want his money, and I don't need your approval." Elizabeth's smile was icy as she slipped away, but James's face was a mask of conflict. "Sarah, I didn't agree with her," he said, reaching for her. She pulled back. "But you didn't defend me either, and you went behind my back with the grant." Her voice broke. "I thought you saw me, James, not some charity case." The world outside the diner wasn't kinder. Gossip blogs, hungry for a story, dug into Sarah's life, labeling her a gold digger and dragging Noah's military record into the spotlight. "Southside Waitress snags billionaire," read one headline, each word a knife. The scrutiny followed her to work, where customers whispered, their eyes judging. The unfairness of it burned. Her struggle, her brother's pain, reduced to tabloid fodder because she dared to cross into James's world. She felt exposed, her identity as a hard-working woman erased by assumptions about her motives. That night, in her apartment, Sarah sat beside Noah as he slept, his face peaceful for once. She pulled out a letter he'd written during therapy, his handwriting shaky but sincere. "I'm sorry for the times I hurt you, Sarah," it read. "You're the only reason I'm still here." Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the letter, the weight of her love for him grounding her. She'd fought for Noah, for herself, against a system that left people like them behind. But James's actions, however well-intentioned, made her feel like she was losing that fight. She needed to reclaim her story, even if it meant walking away from the one person who'd made her believe it was possible. Sarah Thompson stood at a crossroads, her heart bruised as deeply as her wrists once were. The sting of James Parker's betrayal, his secret backing of her grant application lingered, as did the cruel whispers of the world that saw her as a gold digger. Yet, in the quiet of her apartment, Noah's letter, with its shaky apology for the pain he'd caused, anchored her. She'd fought for him, for their family, against a system that discarded veterans like him and judged women like her for daring to dream. But now, she needed to fight for herself, to reclaim the pieces of who she was before life demanded she be everyone else's strength. At Noah's next therapy session with Dr. Emily Chen, Sarah sat stiffly in the waiting area, her thoughts a tangle of anger and longing. James had kept his distance since their argument, respecting her need for space, but his absence felt like a hole she hadn't expected. When Noah emerged, his steps lighter than she'd seen in years, he gestured for her to join him. "I need to tell you something," he said. A far cry from the haunted man she'd known. Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly, and they sat in a small, softly lit room, the air heavy with anticipation. "Sarah," Noah began, his eyes meeting hers, "when I was deployed, I saw a picture of James Parker in your old college dorm, that business magazine you kept, the one with his face on it. You talked about him after his guest lecture, how he spoke about using tech to help people, not just to get rich. I never forgot that." Sarah's breath caught, her mind racing back to that lecture hall, where a younger, hopeful version of herself had asked James a question about ethical tech development. She'd been struck by his passion, his belief that wealth should serve a purpose. "When I saw him in that conflict zone," Noah continued, "I recognized him. It wasn't just my job to save him. It felt like fate, like I was protecting someone you believed in." Sarah stared, her heart pounding. "You never told me," she whispered. James, who'd joined the session at Noah's request, spoke up, his voice low. "I remember you from that lecture, Sarah. Your question about ethics in crisis tech, it stayed with me. I looked for you afterward, wanted to offer you an internship, but you'd vanished." The revelation hit her like a wave, connecting dots she hadn't known existed. Their lives had brushed against each other years ago, long before the diner, before Noah's injury, before the bruises. The weight of this coincidence, of fate, shook her. But it also ignited something. Sarah returned to her apartment that night, her mind ablaze. She dug through a box of old college keepsakes and found the magazine Noah mentioned, James's younger face staring back from the cover. Beneath it was a journal, her handwriting filling pages with stories she'd once poured her soul into. She read until dawn, tears falling as she rediscovered the woman who'd dreamed of creating a space where stories could heal, where people like her, overlooked by a city that favored the wealthy, could find a voice. Open Words wasn't just a dream. It was a rebellion against a world that told her she wasn't enough. The next day, Sarah submitted a new grant application for Open Words, this time without James's name attached. The process was grueling, meetings with skeptical officials who questioned her lack of formal education and financial stability. "A waitress running a literary space?" one panelist asked, his tone dripping with doubt. The unfairness burned, a reminder of how the system stacked odds against people from the South Side. But Sarah stood tall, her voice steady as she spoke of her vision, a place where kids, veterans, anyone could share their stories, free from judgment. She wasn't asking for charity, she was demanding a chance. As she left the meeting, her phone buzzed with a text from James. "I'm sorry for overstepping. I believe in you, Sarah, always will." She didn't respond, but his words lingered, softening the edges of her anger. Alone in her apartment, she looked at a faded photo of her parents, their smiles warm from a time before loss consumed them. They'd believed in her too, in a girl who wrote stories to make sense of the world. Now she'd fight for that girl again, not for James or Noah, but for herself. And in that quiet resolve, Sarah felt the first stirrings of a strength she'd almost forgotten she had. Sarah Thompson stood in the heart of Open Words, her dream made real. The community literary space, nestled in a modest storefront on Chicago's South Side, buzzed with life. Shelves lined with books, donated and carefully curated, invited readers of all ages. A small stage in the corner waited for storytellers, poets, and dreamers. After months of battling skeptical grant committees and her own doubts, Sarah had won the funding for Open Words on her own terms, free of James Parker's influence. The victory was hard-won, but the cost of her rift with James weighed heavily, a quiet ache she couldn't ignore. The grand opening was a celebration of resilience. Kids from the neighborhood, veterans like Noah, and locals who'd never had a place to share their stories filled the space. Noah, now a volunteer, moved with a quiet confidence, his recovery a testament to Dr. Emily Chen's program. He organized a writing workshop for veterans, his hands steady as he handed out notebooks, his eyes no longer shadowed by war. Sarah watched him, her chest swelling with pride. The system had failed him. Southside's underfunded clinics and endless VA waitlists had offered little hope, but together, they'd carved a path forward. James arrived just as the event began, his presence unassuming in jeans and a sweater. He'd kept his promise to give her space, their contact limited to updates about Noah's progress. Seeing him now, standing quietly by the door, stirred a mix of gratitude and longing in Sarah. She invited him in, her voice steady but warm. "Welcome to Open Words," she said, leading him through the space. He asked thoughtful questions about her programs, free writing classes for kids, storytelling nights for veterans. His admiration clear. "This is incredible, Sarah," he said, his voice soft. "It's exactly what you envisioned." Her throat tightened. His belief in her, even after everything, felt like a bridge she wasn't sure she could cross. The evening's highlight was a reading by a shy 12-year-old girl named Ava, whose family lived in a nearby shelter. She stepped onto the stage, clutching a crumpled page, and read a story about a bird escaping a cage to find its wings. Her voice trembled at first, then grew strong, each word a defiance of the world that had tried to silence her. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her own forgotten stories echoing in Ava's. This was why she'd fought for Open Words, to give voice to those the city overlooked, to challenge the inequities that kept dreams out of reach for people like Ava, like her. As the crowd applauded, Sarah caught James's gaze. He nodded, as if understanding the weight of this moment. Later, as they cleaned up, he approached her, his tone careful but earnest. "Sarah, I was wrong to go behind your back. I saw your strength, your vision, and I wanted to help, but I didn't listen. I want to support you, not as a savior but as an equal." His words cut through her defenses, reaching the part of her that had longed for partnership, not charity. She studied him, seeing not the billionaire, but the man who'd remembered her question from a college lecture, who'd carried a debt to her brother across years and continents. "I was scared," Sarah admitted, her voice soft but steady. "Your world, it's so different from mine. I thought I'd lose myself in it." James stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "I don't want you to lose yourself, Sarah. I want to build something with you, if you'll let me." The vulnerability in his voice mirrored her own, and for the first time she saw a future where their worlds could meet, not as a compromise, but as a shared dream. Sarah took a deep breath, her heart steady. "Let's start again," she said, a small smile breaking through, "not as a waitress and a billionaire, but as two people who believe in something bigger." James nodded, relief softening his features. They agreed to collaborate, Sarah leading Open Words, James launching a foundation for veterans' mental health. Their efforts intertwined but independent. The South Side had shaped her, and she'd never abandon it, but now she saw a way to bridge her world with his, not as a fairy tale, but as a partnership rooted in mutual respect. Months later, Open Words thrived as a beacon for the South Side, its stage alive with stories from kids, veterans, and dreamers. Noah's workshops grew, helping others find healing through words. James's foundation funded programs across Chicago, a quiet tribute to the Thompson siblings. One evening, as Sarah locked up, she paused by a photo of her parents on the wall, their smiles a reminder of the love that had shaped her. James joined her, their hands brushing as they stood in the glow of Open Words. Their story wasn't finished, it was just beginning. A testament to two souls who'd found each other across divides, building a future where every voice could rise. This is more than a story, it's a window into the strength of those who dare to bridge divides. Sarah's choice to trust James, to build a partnership without losing herself, hit me hard. It shows that courage can mean opening your heart, not just standing alone. Yet, I wonder if she compromised too much. Could she have built Open Words without him, Stronger in her independence? What's your take? Did Sarah's partnership with James enrich her dream, or should she have walked her path alone? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm eager to hear, whether you agree or not. Thank you for diving into this heartfelt journey with me. If this story touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that stir the soul. Let's keep the conversation alive.